My name is Adam Martin. I'm from Fargo, North Dakota, and I'm the CEO of F5 Project. My mom and dad met in the military. They were there they're in treatment, I guess. I don't know the full story, but imagine that one was there for drugs, the other one was there for alcohol. So it's pretty much what I tell in my talk is that I was screwed from the start. I was conceived in treatment. My dad was very charismatic and everybody liked him. I didn't know that until I went to his funeral and I saw like hundreds of people show up to his funeral and they all had stories of like how my dad was there for them and how he was amazing and how his personality was whatever. And all I remember is my dad never being there. My mom pretty much raised us. She was a tomboy of the family and the oldest of her like 10 kids. She was very dominant in her approach of raising us, but we had a lot of like leeway. So like she worked overnights. So like during the day she would be sleeping and then at night she'd be at work. So we were pretty much unmonitored all the time. I started getting in trouble when I was like 13. Well, I mean, I've always been getting in trouble. I used to have to like bring home like pieces of paper, like cut out paper from my teacher and give it to my mom to like tell her that I was behaving. That was in like first grade. And then I realized I could cut out my own pieces of paper. And so I went like long periods of time without like my mom knowing I was getting in trouble at school. And then by the time we had parent-teacher conferences, she was just like mind blown by how much trouble I was getting in. And so I can't stay focused, type stuff. And when I can't stay focused, I try to tell jokes and I was class clown. And teachers don't really know how to deal with class clowns, So grade school was the same. Junior high was the same. I dropped out when I was just started sophomore year and then got a job as a CNA, a certified nursing assistant at my mom's nursing home that she worked at. So I was in charge of the Alzheimer unit overnights, which was like probably the best job I've ever had because Alzheimer, you're like new to them every time you see them or whatever. So you can like tell all the same stories and make them feel comfortable. Watch Nick at Night. It's like the first time they've seen the TV, like the show it's like reruns all the time. And I took care of them. And then right around that time is when I developed a drinking problem to the point where I was like wanting to drink every day and I started getting in trouble and catching felonies. I never, like looking back, I never like thought to myself that I wanted to like hurt a lot of people. I didn't, into garages or I broke into cars or buildings and stuff. Never in my head was I thinking that people own this stuff. You know what I mean? Like it was just like I was just an adrenaline junkie breaking into someone's like garage and then the chance of getting caught, stealing like chainsaws. Like what am I going to do with a chain, And so honestly, half the stuff that I stole just went like into a field somewhere or, I never pawned it, never made money off it. It was honestly just an adrenaline rush to do half the shit that I did. And so from the time I was probably 16 until I was 31, that was like my life, was like getting drunk, breaking into places, sobering up for a little bit, trying, get the heat off, go to treatment, get back out, start over, go to jail, get back out, start over. So it was like a vicious cycle of like wanting to be sober, couldn't be sober, got drunk, got arrested, went to jail. And then it was just that cycle from the time I was like 18 until I was 31 years old. So I never kept a job longer than 3 months. I never got to see my kids for long periods of time. I spent more time in treatment and in jail, probably in those years than I did have continuously do anything, other than be alive, I guess. And then what happened, I went to a friend's house and he was like the last friend I had, the one that was like still willing to talk to me. And I walked all the way from his house. It took me 2.5 hours to like walk to his house, but I knew that I was like going to get drunk or get high or whatever he had. And so I was incentivized to like walk that far. And we got drunk and then he passed out and then I robbed him. I like took money. I tried to break into his bank accounts through his phone, because I was really scared that I wasn't going to have enough money to get drunk the next day. And then I left, and I passed out at this apartment I was squatting in. The next day there was like a big knock at the door, and I thought it was the cops. I thought he called the cops on me. And I opened the door, and it was like that guy, and he pulled a gun on me and asked me for all his stuff back. And I had a backpack full of I don't even remember what was in there, but the one thing I remember is I stole a bottle, and that was the thing that he wanted back, was the bottle of alcohol. And I pretended that I didn't have it. Like that, looking back on the moment, I was willing to die for alcohol. In the moment, I just wanted to make sure I was going to get drunk. You know what I mean? And it's just funny to me that in that moment, with a gun pulled on you, asking for something, that I completely lied and protected the fact that I had it. That was the last time I ever drank. I don't want to say that it was my bottom. I don't think there's bottoms for alcoholics, because I think they always find a way to get a shovel, or the environment shifts or changes or something, and they become more resentful, and they just grab that shovel and start digging. I don't think there is such thing as a bottom when it comes to alcoholics or addicts. He left, and I've not seen him since, and that was 11 years ago. And that night I got sober, and the next day I knew I was going to need some help. And I walked down to a payphone and asked him to help me, and he told me he would, but I had to walk to his house. And he lived almost the same distance in the opposite direction as the guy who I went drunk with the night before. It was going to take me 2.5 hours to walk to his house, just like it did the day before to walk to the guy's house to get drunk. And my first thought was, that's too much of a walk. And that was when I realized at that moment how inverted my thinking is when it comes to actually wanting to build out my life, and how addicted I was and how alcoholic I was, that I wouldn't even think twice about walking 2.5 hours, but if it was for my recovery, I was going to bitch and complain the whole way. And so that was my first step of admitting that I was a real alcoholic, and I started walking to his place. And it took me 2.5 hours, and from that point forward, I've had nothing but recovery goals. I'm going to get sober for 6 months. I'm going to do my best to get my kids back. I'm going to get a good, I want to eventually buy a house. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I just started crushing them. They were all my goals. Every goal I was setting, I was crushing. And I think that was probably what was the thing that kept me sober, is that I had goals that were achievable and I kept hitting them. And so it was a little bit of dopamine was happening every time I crushed a goal, instead of dopamine happening every time I took a shot. It's just the dopamine, if you will, were few. There was a lot of them, but there was a lot of distance between each one, where I was used to just drinking and just getting filled with dopamine or getting high or whatever. So what I'm saying is that had those feelings not been created every time I crushed a goal, I probably wouldn't be here today, because I was still very much addicted and still very much wanting to drink in my first year. But every time my kid Brecken would show up at my house on the weekends and run to me and jump in my arms, it was like getting drunk for me. And that was when I realized that I was actually in recovery, and everything switched and the environment went into my favor as I started feeling good about life. After my first year, what kind of support did I need? After my first year of recovery, I was working at High Point. I got a car. I found a place to live. All the recovery basic needs of employment, recovery, peer support, all those things that we do or whatever for people, were essentially all built because of all the things that were in my first year of recovery. I lived in Horace, I don't know who's watching this video or whatever, but I lived 11 miles out of town, and I had to get back and forth to work, which was 11 miles in town. And so for the first 2 weeks of my job, someone donated me a bike. And I rode bike back and forth 11 miles. So that was 11 miles in, 11 miles out. So 22 miles from Monday through Friday. And then I went to a meeting, an AA meeting, and I had talked about how I was riding bike to get back and forth to work. And this guy told me that he'd be willing to give me a ride the next day. And then he gave me a ride, and then the next day he showed up again and gave me a ride, and up again. And so for the next 3 months, this guy showed up, mainly because he wanted to help people who were like helping themselves. And the fact that I was riding a bike 11 miles to go to on Cheyenne, of all roads, which is very windy, and like there's a lot of times I had to walk my bike because the wind was in the direction I couldn't ride. It like inspired him to want to help me because of the amount of effort that I was putting into it. And so for the next 3 months, I didn't have to ride bike back and forth. And when he couldn't give me a ride anymore, it was this very same week that I was able to get a license in a car. Right? So it was another testament to like, as long as you put in the work, like results are going to happen, and they're going to happen in your favor, but you have to be willing to put it in. Like, let's say I made it a week riding back and forth, and then I gave up. That ride wasn't going to present itself for another week, and then I would have lost my job. And then, so you just keep putting in the next step and keep showing up with what, current tools you have at your disposal. And the tool for me was a bike. And so, what do we do at F5? We try and find people bikes. What do we do at F5? We try to give people rides to their probation meetings or to work or to whatever. So a lot of the stuff that we do today are things that I found in my journey of recovery that were very beneficial. So in this particular stand, the guy was in recovery, the guy had a car, another guy donated a bike to me, another guy let me sleep in his house and let me rent a room from him. If you were to put titles, on all that stuff, it would be housing with F5, transportation with F5, peer support with F5, except it was people in the community and not people at F5. And F5 wasn't even on the radar yet. Like I was just trying to get to work and get a license and get a car, and it all worked out. It means I have not had any alcohol for 11 years. Which is mind-blowing to me because I could never even stay sober like 3 months, let alone a year, let alone 11 years. What I tell people that are still, I personally like people that are still using when they approach me or they talk to me or whatever, because like I get it. If I'm going to choose between, my kids and using dope or whatever, if I took a lie detector test, I would say I would choose my kids and it would show the truth, but I'm still using. Like that conundrum or that complexity of addiction is very like appealing to me to want to talk to somebody, because it was somebody's words that helped get me sober and telling me things like I'm worthy of sobriety. It's possible for me to have sobriety. I just didn't believe it. I never believed it. But you hear it enough, it plants little seeds. And so if there's someone who's watching this that is still using, I would just say keep trying, no matter what. No matter how many times you use, no matter how many times you feel like you fail. Things that led me to this moment are all the things. All the failure, all the successes, everything, every little thing that happened to me, all the times I relapsed, all the times that I found sobriety, all the jobs I had, whatever, had all led to this moment, to being the CEO of F5 Project.